Okay.
Okay, good morning. Wednesday, we've got a full agenda this morning. Senator Kitchell will be joining us later. She has getting her shots this morning. And so with that, we'll start off. I think we have the Transportation Fund testimony and Michelle, I believe, and Gary Holloway. Is that what it is?
Yep.
Okay, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do and start off our conversation.
All right. Thank you, Senator
Oh, good morning,
Mazza.
Michelle. Oh, I didn't. They said you didn't want to join me this morning, so they said, I give you a hard time. So
I couldn't wait to get here, but I've been trying to get a train to Burlington this morning. So, I was working with some federal officials, so
all right,
we're
get that train. Come on, hey.
making progress.
All right, good. That's what I like to hear. Wonderful. Okay, Michelle, why don't we start with you? And you know the new members, I hope, and you've.
I do.
Okay, go right ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to introduce the topic this morning. Gary's going to give you the bulk of the information, and he can introduce himself at that time. We're here this morning to talk about the proposal by the governor to add one-time money to the Downtown Transportation Fund, which is a fund that we historically have had, and we have had funding levels that have varied anywhere between $300,000 annually to $1 million annually over the tenure of the program. And this year we're proposing to increase these funds to $5 million. And these funds would be used to implement small scale transportation improvement projects that create transportation amenities within downtown and village centers. So in addition to having the program be applicable for designated downtowns, this one-time offering would expand that to village centers, which are also designated, which have gone through a planning process called our Better Connections program, as well as some Chittenden County communities which don't qualify for Better Connection because they have their own very large pot of planning funds, and so they're not in that grant program that other communities are in, but they do a robust planning process of a very similar nature to Better Connections. And so this is what we're bringing to the table. This would not be something we put in the transportation fund in terms of any language. It goes through the it goes through the big bill. But the money's in our budget and we transfer it over to the Agency of Commerce, and Gary is the program administrator. And so I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about the program and how this would work.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. All right, Gary, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you all for having me. Gary Holloway. I'm a downtown program manager in the Community Planning and Revitalization Division of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. So one of the programs that I manage is a Downtown Transportation Fund, which is what I'm going to be covering today. So very nice to meet you all. I have if I could get permission to share my screen, I can pull up my presentation.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
All set. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Let's see if I can find it here. Oh, just a minute. It's on. I can see it on my screen, but for some reason I don't see it.
I'm just trying to think of how to help you.
On my selection screen here.
Maybe stop sharing and start again, and then just stop the share, start again, and then pick the screen that you want to share. And it should have a green frame around the screen that you do want to share. And then we'll tell you when we see it. That helps.
I always find it's helpful to send it Mach 2 against the wall.
Oh, there it is. Sometimes I have to click an extra button that that shows all my I have a lot of documents open right now. Sometimes it doesn't show them all. There you go. Can you see that?
There.
Yes.
Great. Great. So the Downtown Transportation Fund is a program that we've had in place for over 25 years, since the beginning of the designated downtown program, which I administer. Here's a nice picture of Virgins, who's really taken advantage of the Downtown Transportation Fund over the years to help make, accessibility improvements and beautification efforts. Go to the next.
Excuse me, has St. Albans also jumped on, because they have a beautiful downtown?
Absolutely, and I'll show some pictures actually. Of
Okay,
St.
I just
Albans.
thought every time I go there, I'm so impressed with downtown St. Albans. It's just a warm, welcoming downtown. It's got good signage. It's got flowers. It's just an exciting downtown. I don't know.
They're one of our kind of poster communities for how to,
I
how to.
thought so, because they welcome with the welcome signs for winter and summer and fall. And they got flowers galore in the summer, and I've always been so impressed with St. Albans.
They have quite a hefty budget just for flowers. At one
Okay.
point, I don't know what it is now, but at one point they had about a $40,000 flower budget.
Well, I'll tell you, it really
annually.
adds to their downtown. I
Yeah.
don't know if it helps successful, but the stores look all filled. So anyway, just getting ahead of myself, but I just want to add that.
Absolutely. Yeah, feel free to ask me questions along the way here. I just wanted to touch on, the fact that this program, the Downtown Transportation Fund, is a direct benefit of the Downtown Designation Program. Downtown Designation Program was established to help revitalize our communities. We also have a designated village program for our smaller communities. We have about 200 designated village centers, and we have 23 designated downtowns that you can see marked on the map here. With the Downtown Designation Program, we establish a boundary for what defines that designated downtown, which is different than other types of designations like National Historic designation and whatnot. This is a state designation. We define a boundary, which helps us determine some of our other funding opportunities, whether properties are eligible or projects are eligible within this boundary. The Downtown Designation Program, or the Downtown Transportation Fund, is directed towards investments within these areas or directly serving. So it is possible for, say, a sidewalk project that connects a neighborhood that directly connects it into the downtown would be eligible for Downtown Transportation Fund as well, as long as it's contiguous.
Gary, the downtown fund, does it have a list of criteria, what you have to do? What sort of examples is that money used for? You said sidewalks.
I'm going to show you in just a minute here.
Okay, all right.
Give me just another
No,
slide or two.
Good.
So the municipality would apply for the funding annually. We announce usually in December, January, we announce the funding available. Like Michelle said, it varies a little bit depending on recapture funding. This year, we actually have about $490,000 thanks to a boost of a one-time $100,000 allocation that the legislature provided us last year, which is great. We have a good chunk of money this year. Usually it ranges in that kind of $350,000, $400,000 range. Municipalities can apply for up to $100,000. It is a one-to-one match. It's a reimbursement grant. And these are quick build projects, shovel-ready projects, as opposed to kind of larger transportation projects that may take multiple years. When they're applying for this fund, typically they're far enough along in the process where they can get the project started within 18 months and complete it within 30 months. And oftentimes this funding will help tag on to other larger transportation projects that we've seen, like in Waterbury's going through a really large transportation project right now. Middlebury is going through a gigantic, transportation project. And this money can be used for some aspects that may not be covered by some of that other funding, such as bike and pedestrian amenities or street lighting, wayfinding signage. But oftentimes it's directed towards, streetscape improvements like you've seen in St. Albans or Virgins, where it's making things safer, easier to walk around, makes it more beautiful, attractive to attract people to want to come downtown and shop. Here's a snapshot just over the last 5 years that kind of just demonstrates the demand for the program. We've been able to award 30 different grants. Almost all of the designated downtowns have applied for the funding in the last 5 years, 19 of the 23. We've awarded $1.9 million. And one of the things that we really see with this program is it leverages additional funding. So $16 million is leveraged with the 1.9 that we were able to offer. And here's a interesting picture of Virgins from probably, circa 1980, early 80s, where they had steps going into each of the businesses. So not very ADA accessible. They actually work with the property owners to kind of share the cost. So they did a nice walkway all the way across a couple buildings here. And so the property owners chipped in a little bit of money and the city covered the rest of the cost and were able to really make it attractive.
The property owners do the buildings, right? The doors and the windows.
That's
and all
right.
That. Okay.
Yeah, we don't do any of that work. And like I said, this is kind of unique. We don't see too many municipalities kind of do that direct transportation work right onto the, right up to the doorstep. This was kind of unique in that way. But the city worked with them and was able to achieve that. But we're not doing any of the facade work or signs for businesses.
Right.
That's on them.
Yep.
And then here's that St. Albans picture that you were imagining. This is a restaurant that had pretty tight sidewalk previously. And as you've seen in kind of stories since COVID, particularly, a lot more kind of spreading out onto the sidewalks and streets. And having these types of spaces is really terrific when the weather's nice. And now that we're in kind of socially distanced, particularly, it's really, really helpful to add these amenities. Here's another project that we did in Bristol. This is Bristol's Town Green. VTrans was doing a major project along Main Street, and the town wanted to be able to kind of tie into that project with a lighting project to make it a little bit safer, a little easier to access through the park at night. So they added some benches and some street lighting through the green all the way to that transportation project, that intersection a couple years ago. Here's Brattleboro. This is at the co-op project that several years ago when they built the co-op, the city had to do some amenities to connect the river and the parking garage on the other side. So they did this pedestrian walkway. As you can see, the bike racks and access behind you would be kind of that major intersection down in Brattleboro across to New Hampshire. This is down in Bennington. This is the park at 336 you might be familiar with. This was a pocket park that was just underutilized in between two buildings, and the town worked with the downtown organization and some other nonprofit organizations to raise funding and go through kind of some designs. This is a conceptual design. It actually was completed in the fall. I don't have great pictures of the final product, but it's turned into a really terrific kind of space for people to come and sit and have lunch and for programming. This is Springfield. A couple years ago, the town worked with historic preservation to kind of identify a building that was literally falling into the river, and basically determined that it no longer had any kind of historic value or it was beyond repair. So they were able to take that building down and expand upon a really tight pocket park that they had and expand it all the way across. They've just completed phase 1 and phase 2 of the project. There's still more for them to add. They want to continue along a walkway along the river and add some additional amenities to this particular project. So fortunately, this money that we have is flexible enough that it can fund these types of innovative projects. Once again, this kind of just demonstrates just in the past 2 years how many applications we receive. 23 applications requesting $1.5 million, and we were able to fund just under $900,000 of those projects. This graph shows you a snapshot over about 5 years of where the funding level that we had available versus what the requests were. So the blue is what we had available and the orange were the requests. So you can see we're leaving quite a few projects off the table here. And then similarly, this graph shows you how many communities have been awarded versus how many communities have applied. So blue awarded, orange applied.
Gary, may I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So Chair Mazza, I hope you're okay.
Yeah, go
with me
ahead.
asking
Yeah,
a
go
quick
for it.
question?
Yep.
So when you've been denying these the excessive requests, sometimes it's money, sometimes it's just the request didn't seem to fit. Is there any characterization you'd give for the projects that weren't approved? Was it just that we didn't have enough money and that they were all qualified, or is there some portion that just didn't make the grade?
Well, as you can imagine, with any grant program, you're going to have a project or two that comes in that's either just not ready, it's not baked enough, or maybe didn't pass the the straight phase test of a high enough quality project. But I'll tell you that the majority of the projects that we get in, and Michelle can attest to this because she's on our downtown board and she has to review and score these. So I'll let her speak to that as well. But we get a lot of really quality projects in there, and sometimes there is one or two that you wouldn't fund anyway. So I'm not suggesting that we would fund everything that came down the pike. Michelle, jump in on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that typically there's a great deal of readiness. I feel like it's a small pool of qualified applicants who are able to access these resources. They typically have professional staff or have engaged consultants to assist them with the planning for their projects, and their projects are really well formed and ready to go. And I think that sort of speaks to the fact that these are designated downtowns that are held to a higher standard in terms of the benefits we're providing them and the capabilities that they need to have within their staff structure and their consulting teams to advance the kinds of projects that create, the Virgenzas and the St. Albans and, the different types of community development that we're seeing as a result of this type of investment.
And I think I'll just add that, with the competitive criteria as we've shaped the program over time, has really tried to point the criteria towards projects that have been well thought out through a public engagement process, so that they're not just throwing something on the wall. They've actually thought it through, either through a municipal planning grant or a Better Connections grant, or some other thoughtful engagement process to get to where they were when they submitted the application. So this is just, this slide just kind of demonstrates the importance of creating vibrant downtowns. As you can imagine, now more than ever, as over this past year, our brick and mortar stores have really been decimated. And so every little bit that we can do to try to reinvest money into these communities, to make them more vibrant, to make them easily accessible, attractive, to want people to want to open up businesses. These are really important things that we've seen over time that have paid dividends. I have just two more slides, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. I just wanted to tie in this kind of next step in what's being proposed in the legislation that would expand the program to include village centers that have participated in the Better Connections grant program. This program is a partnership between VTrans and the Agency of Commerce and Community Development primarily, and the Agency of Natural Resources is a strong partner as we're trying to make green infrastructure improvements, and the clean water funding that gets tied into this program as well. As you can see, I'll use the Virgins Downtown Basin Master Plan as an example. About 4 or 5 years ago, they participated in this Better Connections program, trying to make a better connection from the Basin Harbor into the downtown. And they looked at everything from kind of major reconstruction work that may cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, all the way down to maybe changing the alignment of parking spaces to add bike lanes, or to add a crosswalk in an unsafe area. So some of the things that come out of this program are low-hanging fruit that can be achieved within a year, and other things are going to be much more in depth of a process that may take multiple years. I wanted to just show you some of the designated villages that have been through the program. There's been about a dozen in the last 6 years of the program. It was a program that was running once a year. We took a break in 2019 to do an evaluation of the program, and then COVID hit, so kind of paused it for 2020. And then we just got a bunch of applications in this winter. And so we anticipate probably funding 2 to 3 more designated village centers this year, and then another few 2 years from now. But there has been a lot of interest. You can see at the bottom here, 10 communities expressed interest this year, but weren't quite ready to submit complete applications. And some of them did submit complete applications. But just wanted to show you there is a lot of interest across the state, for this program. And as Michelle mentioned, Chittenden County Village Centers would also be eligible if they've been through a similar type planning process. So that probably would open it up to maybe another 4 or 5 village centers in Chittenden County. So maybe say 20 village centers would be potentially added as eligible for the program if this were to go through. So I'm going to stop there. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. I can stop sharing my screen.
Committee, any questions? My fear is that, I've been in retailing all my life, and boy, some of these downtowns, this retail business is changing so dramatically. It's sad. It really is. Because I don't know how they're going to, regardless of what they do, it's so difficult to attract people to shop anymore because everybody's used to this online shopping, and it's going to, boy, I'll tell you, I went to University Mall here a week or so ago, and you walk by and you wonder how they're paying the rent. There's just no, they're all buying online. And the only thing that helps some of the downtowns, I think, like St. Albans or even Bridgend, the parking is out front. And that's a big benefit because, people are reluctant to park a long ways away and leave their car and walk somewhere. But I noticed, like I said, I always look at St. Albans, you can park in front of the business primarily within a few parking spaces. I think that's one advantage because as far as parking garages, you really have to make a day of it or half a day of it to go to Burlington and park in the garage and go down Church Street. You just can't run in and buy something and get out of there. And but that's my own opinion about. And I love to see downtown survive, but boy, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. I don't know how they're going to do it because every year it's getting more and more. If you look at Amazon, what their volume is and their sales, and it's just crazy. It's hard to compete with it. Yeah, go ahead. You order stuff, and if you don't like it, they'll give it to you. I mean, they don't even want you to mail it back to them. I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah, the pandemic hasn't done any favors to anybody.
No.
Anybody who was resistant to that has jumped on board with it.
Oh God, the young people have no desire. I mean, we older folks, I love to shop. I mean, I always have, but the young people, they just sit home. And I know one of my friends, they order like 3 or 4 items and they send back what they don't want. I mean, that's what they do. It's easy. They can try them on and send them back.
I do have one question.
Yes, go Senator Pritchard.
Yeah, Mr. Holloway, it seemed like the definition of transportation is a little loose in these projects. Like, how do you define the difference between a park and a transportation project? Or are you considering parks as part of any pedestrian, because any pedestrian could walk through them? Or
I think
do you get proposals where you say, oh, that doesn't fit into a transportation fund?
Yeah, it needs to be a transportation project. So, someone can't just come in and say, hey, we want to plant some flower baskets. Can we get some money? That's not how it works. It does need to be a transportation project first and foremost as an implementation project. But we do look at, we do view pedestrians as a huge part of the transportation system, right? So sidewalks are part of the transportation system as we think about the complete street nature of our downtowns. And so as we're funding public spaces, we're not funding private lots. So if there is a park or if there's a publicly owned property along a riverfront, you know, think of Winooski, for example. They have that beautiful, beautiful walkway along the riverfront. That is transportation, very much so. That could potentially connect someone from, you know, a neighborhood into a downtown, for example, and bring that link and that important connection in.
Yeah,
So we do
that makes
qualify
total,
this. Yeah, go ahead.
that makes total sense. I guess I was thinking more of the pocket parks, which I love pocket parks, and I'm glad you're funding them, but it seems though the connection to transportation is a little less clear.
Yeah, I kind of look at it as parking for pedestrians. So that is kind of a unique way of utilizing the funding. We haven't that may have been the first one that we looked at that got creative and looking at how they looked at transportation. But as you can, we're seeing this a lot around Vermont, where we're seeing these kind of rest stops for pedestrians, I'll call it. So older people are, you know, going on walks and then you need to kind of get to a location and take a break. And so it's almost like there's parking spaces for pedestrians.
Yeah,
So
no, they're great
pocket
for
parks
kids
that way.
too. If you're trying to get somewhere with little kids, they're great to pull off into a pocket park.
It's creative. It's different, right? It's not the way we would typically think of transportation. But we do have a little bit of flexibility. But we're not trying to just fund these, you know, crazy off the wall projects. But they do need to tie in their application that kind of need an impact on how you know, this is impacting, you know, the downtown from a transportation standpoint.
Good.
I would also
Yeah.
let you know that in addition to the Downtown Transportation Board, which, you know, is an array of wide representation from the League of Cities and Towns, chambers of commerce, economic development organizations, state agencies and community-based folks that we also, the Agency of Transportation reviews the applications that come in before the board is provided them, in addition to Gary and his staff, so that we feel confident that projects are ready, that they're well-formed, that their budgets are appropriately structured, that the permits are in place, et cetera. So it's a pretty robust process to make sure that we have viable projects that meet the kind of standards and criteria that the program is designed for.
Senator Chittenden, you had a question?
I was just going to build off your comment, Senator Mazza, and I want to say I agree. As a South Burlington City Councilor, the U-Mall has been struggling for some time. And one thing that we're observing is that people still like, as this pandemic's proved to me and my kids, we still like to go out and do things, but we're not going to go downtown Burlington if we need a convenience item because it's just parking's a bear and it costs you more time. So we're going to go to Walmart, but we still go downtown Burlington to get dinner, to get a drink, to get a coffee. And so I'm seeing that I love what you showed, Gary, with the recapturing of some parking spaces for pedestrian, because when people destined to go downtown, they want those spaces, but they're not going down for convenience retail items because that's just so much easier on Amazon these days. So it's a remaking of our downtowns, and I'm excited with the direction you're going in.
Yeah, that's the way it is, because that's what's, I don't know how Church Street is going to, because like I said, if you have difficulty walking or anything, you're not going to park in a garage, you know, half a mile away and walk downtown just to pick up some simple item. So it's a tough decision. Well, Gary, that was a great presentation, and I thank you. Any other questions at this point from Gary or Michelle?
Could I just
Gary,
make?
yep.
I just wanted to emphasize one more point, and Michelle touched on this, but I just wanted to mention it again, that when we established this program, the legislature established this program as kind of a key benefit to designated downtowns back in the late 90s. It was established at a $1 million level. And when we hit the Great Recession of 2008, you know, the state had to cut a lot of programs, and this was one of them that got chopped in half and never really ever made it back up to that funding level. So I just wanted to point that out. While this is a big ask, one-time ask, you know, the funding for the program was at a higher level at one point. And it's been kind of, for the last 13 years, been at a lower level. Fortunately, last year we did get that $100,000 boost, like I mentioned, which I think a lot of communities will be happy this year that there's a larger pool of funding to apply for. So
there's a lot of communities still applying then. You don't see a decline in applications.
No, we get on average probably, 10. And I think I've been here since 2014. I think one year we had 14 of the 23 apply in one year, but usually it averages around 10 applications, like about half of the downtowns apply every year.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And we'll be in touch if we need anything else. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
your time. Appreciate it.
Next item this morning is the Governor's Highway Safety Alliance budget. And I think we have Allison and Josh, I believe.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Morning.
So, I'm going to do a quick introduction. I know we don't have a whole lot of time. We have about a half
Okay.
over. So, again, just to introduce myself, I'm Josh Schultz. I oversee the Operations and Safety Bureau at VTrans, and the Highway Safety Office is part of our team. And they really focus on the behavior side of safety. And what, in a really high level nutshell, what they do is this team receives money from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA. You probably have heard of NHTSA over the years. And they connect that money to improve behavioral safety. And they connect that money to different engineering entities, education entities, enforcement entities, and even emergency medical services, the EMS entities. And they do that through grants. And so Allison's going to take the helm here, and she's going to explain exactly how that money's connected and kind of what it's, again, at a high level, and we can go into much detail as you guys want, but how that money is spent. So Allison, I'm going to turn the reins over to you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Allison LaFlamme, Administrator of the State Highway Safety Office in the Operations and Safety Bureau of VTrans. Good morning.
Good morning.
Is it okay if I share my screen?
Sure. I'd love to.
Awesome. Let me know when you can see that. I will click the share button here. That will help. Is everybody able to see that? Okay, great. So with me today, I have Danielle Record, who is our Administrative Services Manager, and William Jenkins. Bill is our law enforcement liaison in the South. Paul White is not here with us today, but if you have in-depth questions about our budget, particular projects, that's why I have Danielle here, and Bill, if we have any more in-depth questions regarding law enforcement. We submit a budget every July, and then we revise our budget every January after we close out our federal year. So we run our federal fiscal year from October 1 through September 30th in our department. And we build our budget only on new money when we create our highway safety plan, and then we budget all of our carry forward funding in January. So we're right now in the process of doing that, and we are putting our carry forward funding into projects. So what I'm about to show you here in this revised 217, it's a number that NHTSA assigned to this document. We have a $2.3 million budget right now that programs all carry forward money, and it also accounts for all new funding that we've received this year from NHTSA and all of our 164 transfer funds. So these funds from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration have to go to, from fund sources, have to go towards data-driven projects. And so we use crash information, we use seatbelt survey information, we use all kinds of distracted driving attitude survey information to review and then assign funding when we receive applications each spring towards projects. And then we award those projects in our highway safety plan. So the 402 community and highway safety, just a broad overview, that's our kind of like our general fund. I liken it to that because we can use it for most any kind of highway safety behavior change. And we're always working towards the zero death motto that NHTSA has for all states. And so we assign that in a variety of ways, and we'll break it down for you a little further down. But you can see a variety is done under enforcement of 1.4 million. of that section of funding. So that's the bulk of our funding, as well as other projects. In the safety lose section, we have two fund sources where it's 164 funds, and that's transfer money over from federal highway within VTrans, as well as our 1906 race data and evaluation program. And then NHTSA gets really specific in the 405 section. So in these sections, we have to use the funding that we receive, and all of these are formula grants, I should mention. So depending on VMT, fatality data, all of that information, our state laws, et cetera, NHTSA formulates how much money each year that we receive.
Senator Birchlick, there's motorcycle training on there, so you notice that? So I just, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So all of that funding comes through to us each year, and we have right now, like I mentioned, a $12.3 million budget, and that number includes that transfer money from federal highway. Now, to give you a little bit more of a breakout, every spring, and we're about to do it again, we create a highway safety plan budget. And NHTSA's a little backwards. They don't tell us exactly how much money we're going to get when we submit our July 1st highway safety plan budget. And we only program new funds. So what we do is we take a 3-year average of our money, and we figure out how much we'd like to ask from federal highway for 164 alcohol countermeasure funds. And we create a budget off of that methodology. And then when we find out right around August 15th how much we're going to receive, NHTSA sends us a letter, and we usually get award amounts at that time, and then we make any adjustments. So when we submitted our July 1st highway safety plan, we submitted a budget of $7.2 million. And that has grown since we started receiving the comprehensive distracted driving funds of just over $2 million. And so that we received with the help of legislative changes, adding a junior operator minimum fine with your help and with House Transportation's help, that it got signed into law last year, 2 years ago. And we started receiving that fund last year. So the first year in 20, we were a little conservative. We weren't sure exactly how much we were going to receive. And then we started seeing that we received 2.4 million 2 years ago, 2.3 million this year. And we expect that that will probably shrink over time, because as other states come on board, the piece of the pie for everyone else shrinks a little bit. Our carry forward, each year we do better and better. This past year that we just closed out being an exception. We all know that COVID had an effect on everyone. And it certainly had an effect on the amount of enforcement that could be done. Trade shows couldn't be done for education, those types of projects. So our travel, our conferences, et cetera. So it all had an effect. And so we ended up carrying forward $5.2 million. And in 19, we carried forward just over 2 million, just under 2 million, excuse me. So it definitely had an effect, but we have 4 years to spend our money when we receive it. And NHTSA is talking about allowing states, they've put it in writing, that if we may need more time to spend this money, we can ask for a waiver. They've been incredible working with us this past year on waivers if we need them, offering up assistance. So we programmed that $5.2 million into that $12.3 million budget.
Chair Mazza?
Yes, yes. Senator Birchlick.
Allison, can you tell me what the finding was? Was that fiscal year, you had a single audit finding about the carry?
Yeah, I believe it was in fiscal year it might have been in 19. They thought that the auditor's determination was that we could potentially be putting the state in jeopardy if we were to overextend with carry forward, because We are estimating in March and April for what the following January we're going to have. And so it was agreed upon that the solution would be only to program new funds, and then in that January to program the carry forward funds.
Okay.
Make absolutely certain that we wouldn't be in that position.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Yep. We just talked about carry forward. Our expenditures. Here is a graph showing the last 5 years of expenses that we have, money that we have paid out. And in 2020, despite a COVID year, we still expended $4.2 million. The education programs that we work with, they found ways to get online and teach. They were very creative, online trade shows, webinars, conferences. To get the message out, a lot of things ended up being free to attend. I know from our office, we attended a lot of free type webinars that we typically might end up having to pay a fee for. So, but we found a way to do it. In addition, the enforcement hours weren't out there as usual, but there were some agencies that were able to do modified enforcement. We were able to put out a media project. I think you've all seen the Drive Well campaign. We're very proud of that, the start of that new project. And the first one up was a distracted driving message, and we will be working on future messages. So we were still able to do our program despite all the challenges of this past year. This next graph is new funding to the state. And this does not include federal highway funds. This includes just the new money that NHTSA sends over directly to VTrans. So this shows an increase in fiscal year 20. We had he's waiting to get in. So in fiscal year 20, we had $6.2 million in new funding. And in fiscal year 19, we had $6.7 million for an average of $5 million over the 5 years. So like I mentioned, the increase, the bulk of that comes from the comprehensive distracted driving funding that we received in 20 and 21. And as well as we received Section 1906 funds. We had a 2-year cap that we can receive that 2 years in a row. That's $375,000. And we also received 405H money, which was non-motorized, which is based on NHTSA's determination. We received just over 200,000 of that, but we were not eligible for that in 21.
Allison, do you know if we've made any progress on distracted driving? It seems to me that there's no let up on that. What can we do anymore to stop distracted driving? It is, I'll tell you, I don't go far, but every time you go somewhere, you see people with their phones and books and everything else in their hands. I don't think we're succeeding there, but I don't know what else we can do.
Sure, and I encourage Bill here to jump in. We have a new campaign that NHTSA put out. I think last year was the very first year, called Connect to Disconnect, where they actually put out a mobilization for distracted driving, and it's going to occur again in April, however, in a modified way this April. And so I wish that it was like a 2-week, like click it or ticket campaign, something of that nature. It's just a couple of days. Bill, would you like to speak to that?
Sure. Yeah, you make a good point, Senator. It's definitely a problem that continues. I think we were making a little bit of progress, but this past year, I think our progress has gone backwards largely because of COVID, and a lot of departments have been very hesitant to aggressively enforce any motor vehicle laws, including distracted driving.
Right.
So in 2019, like Allison said, we had a new campaign called Connect to Disconnect. It was a 4-day campaign, and I thought it was a really good step towards, putting it out there and educating the public about distracted driving. And the campaign actually went really well for a new campaign. We were supposed to do it last year, but unfortunately got canceled again because of COVID, because it happens in April. So it was like right in the middle of when it all was started. So it got canceled, unfortunately. I'm hoping it will come back this year, this April. I think it will, and we will do it, but I don't know how much participation we'll get. And I think that all depends on where we're at.
Oh, shit.
Because we've
Liz, you're
been,
unmuted.
we've
Sorry.
been it's okay. That's okay. We've been hesitant to, we're not going to force any agencies to really get out there right now, because, it's up to each individual agency to decide how comfortable they are enforcing the law.
Yeah, just.
But the other problem with distracted driving is really hard to track, because as it's become more illegal, as we've passed laws, then people, of course, are less willing to admit to it. So, if there's a crash and they were on their phone, generally a lot of people aren't going to admit to that. So
That's right.
it's very hard to,
Unless you catch them in the act, it's difficult.
but we have a lot of luck with like spotter patrol. So the officers will have like 2 or 3 people, and they'll have one person like up on an elevated area or something and look down and then radio ahead to somebody down the road. And those seem to work really well. But again, I'm hopeful as this COVID, I'm hopeful that, COVID will get better and that we can get back to doing that kind of stuff.
Thank you. Okay.
For our total budget, all funding, including 164 transfer funds, the last 2 years, we've been hovering right around $12 million. So as you can see, that comprehensive distracted driving fund has bumped this total up as well. And so right now we are currently programming, we're in the middle of it, all of our money into projects, and you'll see that in a few moments that we are still working with NHTSA, and we've noted it in our breakdown budget. If the project hasn't yet been approved, or we're drafting up information regarding that particular project. Our Drive Well budget, one thing about that comprehensive distracted driving fund, that 2.3 million, 2.4 million that we've been receiving, it's very, very restrictive. We can flex 25% of the money into what we call like a 402 characteristic. So it can have a general, like we could put it towards education projects, but the rest of it has to stay in the distracted driving realm. And so we can only use that 75% in signage for distracted driving, where we let the public know about the law, education through advertising, and enforcement. So those are the 3, and we're locked into those. So I'll show you in a moment how that breaks down. But this is, we did put a lot into advertising and education through advertising in the Drive Well umbrella. So here is a breakout of page 2. And so we have to have PA funds to run the program. NHTSA requires us to put the majority of our staff up here into this area, as well as our grant electronic application and reporting system gears is up in this area. It's a dollar for dollar match, and we only have to match what we expend. But worst case scenario, we put here what would be required if we were to expend every dollar. The occupant protection subsection within 402 is where we place our enforcement. And we have to place our enforcement here to be eligible for 405B funds. So while the subheading is occupant protection, they actually do all kinds of enforcement. So it's not just looking out for the secondary seatbelt violation. They are looking for speed, aggressive, distracted, anything that when they're working on this supplemental overtime, usually, unless they're part-time or enforcement hours. This is the fund that they charge when they want to work any time of the day, because sometimes daytime hours are overtime for police. So it's data driven. They're out there looking areas where there's high crash locations, and we have had a lot of success. This is where when we do like a click it or ticket project too, they charge to this area. Had a lot of success. We have coordinators in regional areas. Paul and Bill oversee north and south of the state, and they work directly with the police departments. But having these task force teams, these SHARP teams, safe highway accident programs, they can coordinate schedules, coordinate calendars, and they look at the NHTSA calendar, and they work together as a team to go out on patrol. As well as there's an equipment fund under that subsection. Police Traffic Services, Vermont State Police, a crash reconstruction team receives funding from us. They buy drones, CDR equipment to pull information from cars, car cables, etc. Anything that we can do to help them get the information that they need on scene and off the road in record time for everyone's safety and get the road back open, we support them. Safe communities, we have a number of, it's not just about enforcement, it's about education as well. There's no one magic area that's going to solve all highway safety problems. This is where we fund the majority of our education programs, things like Local Motion out of Burlington for bike and pedestrian, Vermont Department of Health with their road users group, which is again a bike and pedestrian statewide program. Just a variety of police agencies that go out and educate drivers education classes. One of our ideas with our carry forward is to talk about a statewide curriculum with the Vermont Criminal Justice Training
What would
Council.
Local Motion use $75,000 for?
Yeah, and that right now is just it's a placeholder. We're investigating how much would it cost to put together a curriculum, build a survey, a pre and post survey, and to pay for potentially a contractor or coordinator. We would have to work that out with Criminal Justice Training Council to deploy a canned curriculum, because right now all the police agencies are using their own. And if we had something, our idea right now, it still is yet to be approved with NHTSA, but our idea right now is to put that canned curriculum out there so that we might be able to get more police agencies on board so that they could take this curriculum and go out to schools and teach it.
Seems like a lot of money. I mean,
Yeah, and it may very well be. And if we don't use it there, because we've had these discussions last year about the potential, but this year we have the carry forward. So if we don't spend it here, we will move it into carry forward amendments, because like Local Motion and those agencies ask for more money than what they received originally, because we can only program new funding.
Okay, yeah.
So,
If it's there, they're going to spend it.
Right. Right. We had a couple of projects that we expended in media. We retagged a NHTSA ad and on rural road safety and deployed that. And then just like on the 402 enforcement section for OP, we have alcohol money that we've transferred over. So these are these enforcement patrols are designed to look at what time of day, what day of the week, where are alcohol crashes happening. And so each agency uses that information and they deploy out enforcement during those time periods to try to reduce drunk driving. And we still have we just got some carry forward. So our team is going to be meeting about programming and putting out amendments to these grants. So that was fun.
Okay. Any questions? I was careful to notice that twice that you used the word crashes because an accident can't be used anymore. So
Right.
we were told last week that the word accident is not going to be used. So I've listened to the whole thing and used crash twice.
Yes, we try to be very good about that. And the SHARP program acronym is Safe Highway Accident Program. So it's like,
so I
ooh.
gotta remember that myself now, because someone told us that a week ago we had testimony. They said that the word accident is gone and crash is going to substitute. So I said, well, that's good. So I got to remember that.
Yeah.
Any other questions from anybody before we wrap it up? Okay, good presentation. Appreciate
All right.
it. Thank you.
you.
Okay, committee, would you like a 10-minute break before we get started? Do I hear yes?
Sure.
Okay, we'll take a 10-minute break. We'll reconvene about 5 after.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody put mute and video on, please.
Okay.
Liz, I'm going to drop off so I can drop on another Zoom, but I'll be back in about 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Don't eat too much.
Jeremy, we're just taking a 10-minute break. Jeremy? Jeremy?
Hi, good morning.
Hi, good morning. We're taking a 10-minute break, so we'll start at 10 past.
Okay, great.
Hi, Michael. We're just taking a 10-minute break.
Okay, no, that's quite all right. I just wanted to make sure I'm not late.
Okay, we'll be on in 10.
Okay.
Are we all set?
I'm set.
Okay, how are we
Let's see,
doing?
who's next?
Let's see.
We have Costa Pappas and Mike Smith, Jeremy, Carla. I don't think Chris Curtis is here yet, but Stephen Gale is, so let's go for it.
Okay, all right, we're going to reconvene this morning, and it is a little after 10. So we got direct to consumer motor vehicle sales. Costas is with us, Mike Smith, Jeremy, Carla, Christopher. Who wants to lead off and tell us what we're going to do?
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Costa Pappas.
for the record, Costa Pappas with the Agency of Transportation, and with me are staff from the Department of Motor Vehicles, the Department of Financial Regulation, the Attorney General's Office, and the consultant that helped us put this
Wow.
report together.
Got a big agenda here. Is Mike Smith back with us again too?
Yes, he is. I wouldn't miss it for the world.
All right. I thought you rode your bike into work today, did you, or what?
No, I drove my truck.
All right, go ahead. Who wants to lead off and tell us what you want to tell us?
Okay, I will begin, and I will share my screen, which I'm seeing is now currently disabled.
Costa, let me help you. Hold the phone.
Yep.
Yep.
I don't know, is,
Okay, you're all set.
Okay.
we don't officially have a quorum. I don't know if that matters, Chair.
We don't yet? Oh, okay. Yeah, we should have a quorum, yeah.
I don't.
Let me see if I can track down people.
Well, I know
Ingalls, I think, just stepped away for a second. He might be there.
Lee, for a couple of seconds, he was on another call, and Jane was supposed to be here at 10:30. So
I can email Senator Ingalls and suggest you get back.
yeah, Senator Ingalls, we have him. We can go on board here.
All right, let me email him right away.
Or send him a text.
Probably went out jogging again.
There he is.
Okay, we're all set. We got some folks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, go
So
right ahead.
I'm going to provide an overview of a legislative report that we submitted in December. The report does go into more length than what I'm going to present here, but like I noted earlier, we do have staff from other government agencies and the consulting firm to answer any questions you have. So can everybody see what I have on the screen? Is the screen share working? Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. So the report that we were asked to present to both transportation committees and the economic development committees deals with direct-to-consumer motor vehicle sales. And the legislation required that we address 7 different questions related to consumer protection laws, financing, taxes, enforcement issues, repair and warranty facilities, laws and best practices in this area, as well as the potential impacts to existing franchise dealers. So we organized the report under the 7 different questions that were included in the legislation. And we consulted a number of different parties that were both included in the legislation, such as other government departments and the Attorney General's Office, the Vehicle and Automotive Distributors Association. We also reached out to a direct-to-consumer motor vehicle manufacturer, Tesla, as well as Carvana and Vroom. And we also, as part of the research component of this project, reached out to the Federal Trade Commission and academics that deal with this topical area. And we had several calls with these different organizations and academics. So the approach that we used for the report was to really document the perspectives of the different parties involved in this issue. So the franchise dealers, the direct-to-consumer manufacturers, and the subject matter experts. And before we get started, just some definitional terms that are important. When we talk about direct-to-consumer motor vehicle sales, we're really talking about primarily two and even a third component, which includes the manufacturers themselves selling vehicles directly, platform DTC sales, which are companies like Carvana and Vroom that own their own inventories and sell them online. And then there are also aggregator platforms, and these are really clearinghouses for vehicles that are available from other parties that are simply aggregated on websites and sold. So they do not hold their own inventory, unlike the other parties I just mentioned. So getting into the specific questions, the first one dealing with consumer protection laws, there are a lot of statutes and DMV rules that deal with this. They generally fall under three different categories. The first being general protections that are applicable to a wide range of products, including motor vehicles. Then there's specific protections that are applicable to the sale of motor vehicles. And finally, there's specific protections for sales from registered motor vehicle dealers. So those are kind of the three categories. I've listed some of them over here. Again, it's a very lengthy list, and the report documents them all. But as it relates specifically to registered dealers, you have rules that govern bonds, how registration, how vehicle purchases occur and how they're canceled, as well as record keeping requirements. And at the bottom of the page, you see an example of a DMV rule in this area that deals with dealer licensing requirements. Again, they're very lengthy and they are documented in the report. What we found looking at this issue is that as a general rule, enforcing laws for vehicles sold by entities outside the state is generally more challenging than enforcing such laws in the state. And this really has to do with the sales information and the tags being more difficult to locate. Without a presence, it may be more difficult to find a representative to talk with. Where are the records held? Are they with the company? Are they with the state DMV? Those get more challenging. And also when it comes to disputes, and I'll talk a little more about this later, but determining the jurisdiction is more complicated when it's out of state and unlicensed sellers. So in Vermont, not only do dealers have a physical presence in the state, but there's also an adjudication method that that consumers can follow if they have a complaint. So on the second question of how financing is obtained, there's really three different ways that a consumer can finance direct-to-consumer motor vehicles. One is through retail installment contracts, similar to the ones that are offered by Carvana and Tesla in states where it has sales locations. That's not uniform. Then you get into third-party registered lending agencies. Tesla operates those in states where it does not have sales locations. And then customers are always free to secure their own financing. So those are the three kind of ways that you can do it. When it comes to consumer protections, we do have a state law that governs consumer protections and remedies when it comes to dealer financing. And the general idea here is obviously consumer protections, would be strengthened if lenders were registered and licensed in Vermont. Again, it's this issue of if they're here and have a, licensed or physical presence, it's much more easier to kind of follow up on any disputes that arise with customers. The third question on how taxes occur when it comes to vehicle sales. So the purchase and use tax, in Vermont is assessed at the time of sale based on the actual price when it comes from a Vermont licensed dealer. There's a variation of that when it's a DTC. So it makes it a little different, as you can see here. And with taxes comes a couple of risk factors, and the risk factors are both on the way we currently operate and in terms of where trends are going, and also in terms of lost revenue that's related to work that occurs outside the state. So, the purchase and use tax right now if it's collected by another state, as direct-to-consumer manufacturers multiply in numbers, the risk here is that a state may decide to collect taxes on a vehicle that's sold in that state. So even though the vehicles are destined for another state, for example, in Vermont, there's always the risk that one of the manufacturers, may be paying taxes in the state of origin. And what happens in that case is we issue a credit for purchase and use tax paid in another state. So that's kind of the risk here. Again, we haven't seen that, but as the number of direct-to-consumer motor vehicle manufacturers multiplies, that is a risk factor that we can be losing out on revenue because of that. Temporary tag revenue loss is another potential. And then there's also a risk in the other direction, which is that we're losing sales tax revenue when customers leave Vermont to do service work for DTC vehicles that they purchase. So imagine an example where there's a location in New York or in New Hampshire, and a Vermont consumer has to drive there for service. Well, the part of that transaction that's taxable, remains in that other state.
If you buy a Tesla right today, and it's a dealer in, let's say, Oregon, when you go to register it, we pay the tax. They pay the tax in Vermont, though, right?
So yes. So the taxes are on a new vehicle. If you purchase it from Tesla, we looked at the DMV records and found that the purchase and use tax was paid.
Yeah.
Where the risk comes in is that as the number of manufacturers grows that deal with direct-to-consumer sales, if a state or even the manufacturer decide that the taxes will be paid in the state of origin, what that means is when the vehicle is brought to Vermont, we issue a credit of what's been paid already, and that's the risk of losing, that tax revenue.
Okay, so yeah, that's what we're trying to avoid. We want to make sure they. So how are we going to prevent all this from happening?
So that's an interesting. Let me go back to the previous slide over here. So I note in the bottom here, it's really unclear what the implications are for changing rules in this area. Because the number of manufacturers is relatively small right now, this is more of an issue, what happens as they multiply in number? And the solution to this one is really tricky because, a lot of states have credits that they issue each other. And I don't know if there's interstate commerce issues that arise due to double taxation, but those are the, kind of the risk factors that are at play here as the number of manufacturers multiplies. Does that answer your question, Senator Mazza?
Yeah, it's such an, I know last year we had this discussion, that's why this study, because we're trying to figure out for the customer's benefit, we don't want to have all these manufacturers shipping direct to the consumer, the customer. It's going to be, there won't be any middle person, and registered dealers have so many rules and regulations to follow, and these folks don't. So I don't know how we're going to prevent that.
May I ask a question, Senator Mazza?
Yes, go right ahead.
I apologize for missing the first 5 minutes, but on this point, if they buy it from another state and deliver it here, paying the sales tax there, does our 5% statewide sales tax still trigger that is occurred on Amazon purchases? I when I buy something on Amazon for the last 2 years, I now have to pay the Vermont state sales tax. I believe that's the case. Is that going to apply to a car purchase from another state?
Yes, Mike Smith.
Hi, Michael Smith, Director of Operations for DMV. So if you pay tax to another jurisdiction on the vehicle, when you come here to register it, as Costa has said, we give credit for those taxes paid. So our goal or charge is to assure that taxes have been paid on the vehicle. So most notably, I see this with like vehicles purchased in Florida and then registered here. Generally, Florida has collected the sales tax. Their bill of sale references that the sales tax was collected by Florida. So as a general rule, those vehicles are registered in Vermont without paying any tax here because it's been paid elsewhere. Many, many years ago, when I first started with the department, when you registered a car, you paid tax on it. Didn't matter if you'd paid tax in another jurisdiction or not. We were sued for double taxation. And I think that's the commerce issue that Costa was alluding to. So now the laws are set up so that credit is given if like sales taxes or like taxes, because we do purchase and use, some other states do sales. So if it's a like tax, we credit for it. If it's not, we don't. If it's like South Carolina that charges like 3% versus 6%, we credit for the amount you paid there, and you would pay the additional whatever is left over to the state of Vermont at the time.
Does every state do this, Mike, or we're different?
I don't have a way to answer that. My impression or my assumption would be that all states are crediting for taxes paid elsewhere, because when we didn't, we got sued. So I have to imagine that based on that lawsuit, because we were doing exactly that, charging you tax regardless of where you paid it. So, and that was many, many years ago.
And a Vermont resident never pays tax. They just get an in-transit plate, and it comes here and they pay tax when they register, correct?
No, so never say never.
Okay.
At the end of the day, you know, a Vermont resident, if you were down in Florida, and that's the one that I see most often, and that's why it's sticking out. If you were down there during the winter enjoying the sunshine or whatever, and you purchase a car, as a general rule, what I've seen on bills of sale over the years is you as a Vermont resident have paid tax on that vehicle to Florida. Now, I don't know if Florida has rules that say if you buy it here, you pay tax here, but regardless, when you come here to register, we check out your documentation, and if we find that you've paid tax to another jurisdiction, we will credit you for that and not collect it here.
I think they all ought to pay tax in the state they register in. I think that would be the simplest way, but I guess we can't do that. I guess it's so it's never going to encourage manufacturers from having dealerships if they can sell direct. Is that an advantage to them?
Well, they rely on a completely different business model, and you know, their business model is that they want to sell direct to consumer and not necessarily be tied to a physical location. You know, so they're all going to be different. Again, we have very few DTCs right now, but the anticipation is that they're going to multiply, you know, that there's going to be more and more DTCs that operate, and each one is going to have their own way of doing business. And that's part of the uncertainty that was identified with the taxation issue. We just don't know.
Okay.
And it similar with enforcement in general, which is tied to the previous slide, is that, you know, in Vermont, licensed dealers are, you know, they're responsible for several record keeping and audit requirements, and there's a list of them in the report. Those do not necessarily apply to DTCs. In fact, they don't apply the ones that deal specifically with franchise dealers. And we've seen one example that's noted in the report is that, you know, there could be a challenge for enforcement of laws on a legal level too. There's one case that cited, you know, where the court made a determination of jurisdiction on which state had authority. So again, it's just another risk factor that the further away you move from having a licensed or physical presence in the state, the more difficult, you know, it becomes to enforce laws in general, whether they're consumer protection or financing or what have you. So in terms of the reasons, if any, to prohibit manufacturers engaged in direct-to-consumer sales from owning, operating, and controlling a motor vehicle warranty facility, you know, the current statute does not allow that. You know, the manufacturers are prohibited from doing that. And there's different perspectives on this issue depending on whether you're a franchise dealer or a DTC manufacturer. From the dealer's perspective, what they relayed to us was that the current system is set up where the dealer serves as an advocate for the customer when it comes to warranty service, because they have both the customer and the dealer have an interest in seeing those warranties being carried out when a vehicle needs repair. There's also according to this argument, a financial incentive for DTC manufacturers to do as little work as possible in order to improve the bottom line. That's kind of the second argument here. Another one is that dealers provide an early warning system when it comes to recall issues because they work on these vehicles so often. They're able to see patterns, and again, that's part of the advocacy, part of the the customer support that dealers bring. From the DTC perspective, they have a different view. What they relay to us is that because of the the warranty work being subject to audited rates, there's pricing incentives for dealers to charge more to customers for non-warranty work, so they can get those audited rates up to a certain level, and those costs are then passed on to the consumer. They also make the claim that it's manufacturers and not dealers that are generally subject to product liability suits, so they have a vested interest in doing warranty work as soon as possible. Customer satisfaction is another point they make. If consumers are not happy with the warranty service that they're providing, they're just not going to purchase a car from that manufacturer. And then finally, a couple more. So one argument is that other consumer products, provide their own warranties and conduct their own warranty work, and that they fall under that similar regime in terms of the type of company they are. And finally, the state is losing tax revenue when a DTC, so when a consumer has one of these vehicles and they have to go out of state for service, the argument here is we're losing tax revenue because of that. They're just leaving the state and getting the warranty work done elsewhere. In terms of laws, rules, and best practices from other jurisdiction, we looked at a number of them, and there's no real best practice when it comes to this. The states really fall under three different categories, and it's kind of all over the map in terms of what's allowed and not allowed per state. Some states explicitly allow direct-to-consumer sales, so there's a list of them over here, and the report gets into more detail about who they are and what they generally allow. They just allow direct-to-consumer motor vehicle manufacturers to sell electric or zero-emission vehicles directly to consumers. Wyoming has a special kind of licensing for DTC sales, and Michigan recently settled a suit with Tesla where they are allowed to operate service and repair facilities, but it has to be through a subsidiary. So it's kind of a different way of setting that up. Some states implicitly allow DTC sales. There's a number here: California, Florida, and Illinois. But even in these cases, some states feel that they still need to protect franchise dealers, and what they do is they limit the right of manufacturers to own dealerships if an existing network of franchise dealerships is in the area or in the state. So that's the more constrained version of it. And then finally, you have explicit prohibitions on DTCs, and there's 12 states that have passed outright bans, although some of them, like New York, grandfathered existing stores. So it's kind of scattered on what's allowed and what's not allowed. And again, the report itself gets into more detail about these three different approaches. And finally, the seventh question has to do with impacts to to franchise dealers as a result of any changes to occur. And again, the views here are split between the franchise dealers and the non-direct to consumer manufacturers. So, this is the group of manufacturers whose perspective is aligned with dealers here on this issue, and that is that there's a regulatory regime in place where a whole body of laws and regulations on how to sell vehicles has occurred, and what they feel is that bypassing all that provides an unfair competitive advantage to DTCs because they will not have all the costs that are associated with complying with what the dealers have to comply with. Veda cited one example of where that is occurring through a subsidiary. In this case, what they noted here is basically the setting up of a parallel business structure for the purposes of selling directly to consumers and bypassing a lot of these requirements. Franchise dealers also make the point that they've invested significant financial resources to establish dealerships that have a major economic impact on local communities, both through tax generation, direct employment, real estate transactions, and philanthropy. And they cite through the national organization numbers that deal with the economic impact at the bottom of the screen, 79 new car dealers and the number of jobs that are associated with that, and the general economic impact, beyond job creation. The DTCs make the argument that if they're allowed to provide all the service and warranty centers, that they would have a similar economic impact, that in their perspective, they have not seen negative impacts that resulted from increased sales of direct-to-consumer motor vehicles. So whatever the impacts are economically for the franchise dealers would similarly accrue through direct-to-consumer motor vehicle manufacturers and their service and warranty facilities. And that is it in a nutshell. Again, the report gets into more detail, but we'd be glad to answer any questions.
Questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a whole bunch of questions. I have a lot of concerns with the study and problems with the way part of it is described here. So I appreciate Costa, the work done here, but either you or some of the others can answer these questions. First of all, it talks about impact of proposed amendments to Vermont law a couple times. It doesn't say in the report what proposed amendments to Vermont law they're talking about. On the amendments that I proposed, it was only to allow the service centers and to allow basically a direct customer manufacturer to become a dealer in the state and follow all the dealer laws.
Right.
So which proposed amendments are they talking about when they talk about the impact of proposed amendments to Vermont law?
Yeah, so that's a general reference to any changes from what we currently have in statute or through DMV regulations.
Any changes? Any changes whatsoever?
Well, changes that deal specifically with changing the franchise dealership requirements.
And who proposed them?
They're not proposed.
It says impact of proposed amendment.
Yeah, so the study looks at, well, what's the alternative to the current prohibition on service and warranty facilities? And that alternative is not to have that prohibition.
I would agree with that, but it goes on to talk about basically allowing DTC sales from the more of the Vroom or the Carvana style, and gets into arguments about whether warranties and issues about jurisdiction, which I know were part of the questions, but nobody has proposed changing the law on those fronts is my point there. So I don't need to belabor that point, but I just think it made some assumptions, or it makes the impression, if you read the report, that people were making proposals to the amending the law that I haven't heard anybody proposing to make. The only proposals I've heard is to allow electric vehicle manufacturers to open service centers in the state. And when they do that, they would become full dealers and follow all the rules. So anything in here that deals with whether you're a dealer or not, it was one of the questions asked, but was not part of any proposed amendment.
Yeah, so we looked at, so question number 7, how any proposed amendments to Vermont law regulating, so we looked at the language in the legislation, and analyzed it from both perspectives. If the question is how any proposed amendments, that we have to assume that the flip side to what we currently have in terms of warranty and service regulations is not having them.
Well, I just wouldn't call them a proposed amendment because nobody's proposed them. I think the drafters of the report got into other arguments that people make, but they're just not proposed amendments. Another issue that I have on page 6, when it talks about the impact of proposed amendments without talking about what they are, it says such action would harm existing dealers, their employees, customers, and communities in which they operate, which is the only time this report really gives a specific statement. I think it does a good job of staying out of taking a side and kind of doing both sides, but that's a very direct comment about a harm, but it doesn't talk about the harm on the other side, or doesn't talk about the benefits there. And I think there's some other times where it kind of does that. The other thing I want to bring up is the report talks about supporters of changing the law. It doesn't say who these are, although it only really quotes Tesla. In the list of who they interviewed, there's nobody listed that I would call a supporter of changing the law, maybe other than Tesla. I assume because the Attorney General office is here that they were consulted, but you don't get the impression that they were consulted in reading the report. So I think it makes a misinterpretation or misperception of what the quote unquote supporters of changing the law are saying without, because they never talked to me. I'm a supporter of changing the law. They didn't talk to any of the groups in Vermont that are trying to change the law. They only talked to Tesla, who that has no presence in the state. So it just seems strange to me that they over and over again talked about what the supporters of changing the law said, but I didn't talk to any supporters of changing the law that talked to anybody that were, other than Tesla, that were mentioned.
Good point.
So that's kind of a problem that I have with that. And then on question 5, which was kind of really the most important question for me, very specifically says what reasons, if any, exist to do this, and it just doesn't answer the question. It just says, well, supporters of changing the law say this, which to my point of who those supporters were. And I think it definitely misrepresents what the supporters, all the supporters that I know, myself, in any group that's working to change this law, would not agree with what this says, what the supporters of the law say, except for the one part about it's unfair that you have to leave the state to do your manufacturing. But when it talks about the supporters of changing the law, talking about current interests are misaligned since pricing based on audited full repair creates an incentive for dealers, nobody that's supporting changing the law cares about that, because if we allow the manufacturers to open a service center in Vermont, they will become dealers. So they'll have all the same other kind of requirements. So just overall, I think it misaligns at least what I'm trying to do and everybody in Vermont that I'm trying to work with wants to do in the way it's listed in the report. So that's, I mean, if you want to respond to that, that's fine. But I also wanted to ask a question of Mr. Curtis about, his involvement in the report, and if they felt as far as what the S47 is suggesting that we do if there's an issue of problems with consumer protection.
Yes, Senator Chittenden.
I just want to say I'm having trouble understanding this issue, and I'm reading the bill and these now. So if there's more readings or background I could to better understand the trade-offs that we're wrestling here, I apologize for not being as up to speed on this. It's, any advice on how I
It's
could,
very complicated, but no, it's a good discussion. We probably won't resolve it today, but don't feel that it's very that's why we asked for some information, because it is very complicated issue. Mike Smith, did you have anything to add to this?
I do not at this time.
You have no suggestions or recommendations how we can make more money?
Well, I mean, it's, I don't know as though allowing direct to consumer sales in Vermont actually has an impact on revenue generated by the department, right? I mean, we're collecting registration fees. In most cases, we are collecting tax. At least that's the research that I've revealed. We're still getting title fees and stuff like that. So, it really feels like the question at hand is, does the statute get modified to allow for, because my understanding of the statute right now is that it does not allow for a warranty service station, if you will, in the state of Vermont. So,
Well, I read on one of your charts here that they collect what, a 56 million or something for authorized dealers of Vermont for motor vehicle. Was it 56 million or more?
not sure what you're referring to.
There's a chart here we had read before us here. Once you go back one or go up one, and I thought I saw the impact it has on motor vehicle registrations.
I think that was the, well, let's get to the slides first, I guess.
No,
I don't think we included that in the slide. There
it
was,
was way down the bottom of this, one of the slides. It was down.
Yeah, I thought I saw it too.
There it is, right there.
Here.
The dealers, Vermont dealers, 2.6 billion in sales and paid 156 million in state sales tax.
Right. So those are Vermont car dealers that are actually selling cars. So
Right.
should the direct to manufacturer go through, theoretically, those taxes are still being collected, correct? So that would say to me that I don't know as though the amount
If I
would go
buy
up.
a car from Tesla today and I don't go through a dealer, you're saying I have to give them credit wherever that car is sold.
If they collected the sales tax. And the research that I did in this report, all of the Tesla transactions that I looked up, every single one of them paid tax to the state of Vermont. Now, some of them had tax credits from vehicles that they'd sold within the 3-month time frame around the purchase, so that would reduce the tax liability. But other than that, all taxes that I saw on those transactions were paid to Vermont.
And we have that issue now, whether you buy it through Tesla or just go to New Hampshire and buy a car, or buy a car in Florida, as was mentioned.
Mhm.
It's the same issue for the dealers, I think. And as far as if we have a concern about Vroom or Carvana, those kind of direct to consumer sales, hurting dealers, I'm totally open to finding a way to protect the dealers from those sales, or protect the dealers from their manufacturers. If, like Volvo, their example was that they think Volvo might be trying to get around the franchise law. Well, then let's strengthen the franchise law to protect the franchisees. But I don't think we should prohibit one company that doesn't do franchise the model. Vermont's not going to convince Tesla to change their model. We could maybe twist their arm and do what Michigan and make them create a fake subsidiary. If that makes it feel better, I don't think it matters. But I just think we're losing a lot of economic development potential from having this service center in Vermont. And if we want to increase electric car sales, and the world's largest electric car sales manufacturer, largest electric car manufacturer, and the manufacturer that makes the electric car with the most US made parts, if we don't allow them to open a service center and become a dealer in Vermont, it seems to be a cognitive dissonance between our goals on that side and our policies to not allow them to to really fully operate in the state. And did you, Costa, work with the AG's office? Because they weren't listed as interviewees in the report.
We did. Let me pull up the slide real quick. Yeah, so these are the different parties that we consulted. Some of them were specifically named in the legislation. Others we spoke to for the literature review to find out what the other states are doing. So we did talk to the Attorney General's office.
And is that Mr. Gale that we have? Who do we have from the AG's office here today? Anybody?
We're supposed to have Christopher Curtis. I will follow up immediately and find out where he is.
Okay. And we can hopefully, this is mainly about the report. But hopefully, Mr. Chair, we can have testimony on the bill S-47 and talk specifically about that. And if there's ways to allow the manufacturers of just electric vehicles that don't have franchise to open a service center in the state, but still protect the existing dealers and their issues with the franchise, I think that's worth doing.
I think that was our goal. Yeah, they go through all the hoops and pay all the charges and things. And I just don't want this thing to balloon into something huge and get out of hand, because it is going to be more and more direct sales, I believe. If we have a franchise dealership program, let's see what we can do to protect it. But I know it's complicated, but I think we got to work our way through it.
Yeah, and I think you have to be careful about the want for electric vehicles and all the incentives given to them, and making sure, again, as Senator Perchlik has just said, that we do, and you, Senator Mazza, that we do protect the dealers that are doing all the fees and all of that. I mean, but be careful about what our wants are so much as to be allowing unfair incentives to further a cause that seems to be what more people want.
No, I think you're right. We want a balance here, and how we're going to protect in the future, because this is changing dramatically. We just want to be prepared, and we don't know exactly, but I think it's a good issue to discuss, and at least we'll get some more answers on it and continue our discussion. Anything else at this time? I don't know if we want to wait and Liz.
I'm working on it. I'm definitely working on it.
Yeah, well.
Maybe give it a minute if you can, but if not.
If not, we can reschedule it to another time.
Yeah, if we could maybe have him come in and talk just about S-47. And
yeah, why don't we do that? If you could schedule him for that.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Anything else for you folks on this report this morning?
No, that's it, Senator. I don't have anything else to add.
All right, good job, and thank you very much. And we will move on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Mazza.
Yes.
So I'm the new guy. I'm going to keep saying that for a month or so. Will we likely be taking testimony from the dealers to just get a better understanding of their reaction to this and how
we can. There is a they have their own folks. Marilyn Miller represents the dealers, and that's a good idea. I want to hear from those. It's an ongoing discussion. I think we don't have all the answers, but we're just trying to prevent something that's going to impact the dealers and their franchises, and we want to make sure it doesn't get out of hand and we have control. I mean, it's only a protection that I think everybody's concerned about. These dealers invest a tremendous amount of money to have a dealership. We hope the day doesn't come where everybody can sell direct without a dealership, because that's what that's what we work with. So it's a discussion we're not going to resolve overnight, but the more information we can get, I believe, the better. And Senator Perchlik got some good questions this morning, some good input, and I think we'll continue this discussion. It's not just for the newcomers, it's for all of us, because it's all a challenge to every one of us. We've looked at this for some time, and we don't have the answers, and we're trying to get the information, and if it's settled in our minds that there's nothing that can be done, oh, so be it, and we move on. But we just want to make sure we're on top of it, because the franchise is quite a big issue, and there's a lot of investments in the whole economy of Vermont from dealers, and and we know it's going to grow. This automobile is going to change dramatically over the years. From the electric, which we encourage electric, we don't want to discourage them, but on the other hand, we want to make sure that consumers and dealers are protected.
Well, being in that business for 20 years, I think the thing that wasn't properly explained well, and I brought it up, and I just said I left it alone. I knew Senator Perchelek had some questions, and I was glad to hear him ask them. But the in-transit plate is something that is used a lot. I mean, I just bought a boat in South Carolina. They gave me an in-transit plate. We transferred it up here. I had shippers transfer it up here. We pay the tax into the state of Vermont. So a lot of these sales that are happening, like Tesla isn't allowed to collect tax on that. I mean, they once in a while, I mean, I've had out-of-state transfer purchases where they do try to collect a tax. And once you say, oh, no, well, listen, I'm not registering it there. I want an in-transit plate. I want to bring it back to the state, and I'm going to register in the state of Vermont. And that's the formula that they use to make sure that when you register it in here, that we do get our taxes for what we're purchasing. So at some point in time, I didn't think it was the forum there to bring it up, but when we have more testimony on it,
Sure.
I'd like to, I'll bring that up some more.
And I saw this week that Tesla also is talking about putting their service centers for repairing cars. I mean, the body work, I saw that they're going to have to, because, folks are buying them and say, okay, where can I go to have them repaired if we have a dent in them or whatever. So it was an issue that they're addressing, I guess, and they're going to have their different locations. Must be they just pick up the car like they do now and service it or fix the dents or whatever they got to do. But it's a different change. Good morning, Senator Kitchell.
Hello, I've been shot up, so I'm
Okay. Are you high right now?
What?
Are you high?
No.
I don't know if you've gathered any of this information, Senator,
No,
but we had this last year, as you know. We're trying to
We
work.
did. We took quite a bit of time, and it seemed like it boiled down to the fundamental question. Not that we weren't collecting the purchase and use tax, but it had to do with availability of repairs needed by Vermonters who happen to own a Tesla, and the prohibition against the service option if you didn't have a franchise. And I think that that's really still the issue at hand, and the extent to which our current law prohibits the opening of not the mobile, but a facility-based service center for their cars in Vermont.
And unfortunately, the study didn't really, there was one question specifically about that, and they
but I thought that
basically
was the heart of the issue, and that is, should Vermont consumers who have bought one of these vehicles that where there's not a franchise in the state, should they have the protection or the convenience of a service station in Vermont?
And one of the ways that you could get around and make it easier to monitor that is in requiring them to join up with if they didn't want to do a full franchise, to join up with a partnership with a already franchised dealer to offer those services.
Yeah. Except I bet those other franchises might not allow that. I don't know, Russ. They tend to be, Ford doesn't like to join up with Subaru maybe or whatever.
Right.
But you're in the car business, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Liz has said that Christopher Curtis is available. So why don't we just switch there for a moment and see what's happening there. There was a question about the Attorney General's office. So can we switch to Christopher Curtis?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christopher Curtis. I'm the Chief of the Public Protection Division at the Office of the Attorney General. Within public protection, we have two core units. We have our Consumer Protection Antitrust Unit, and we also have our Civil Rights Unit. So we are frequently called upon to enforce the state's Consumer Protection Act, which guards against any unfair or deceptive practices in the state. And just happy to have the conversation with you here today. I understand you have, just from listening to the conversation, you have a particular question about the notion of service centers, et cetera. But I am also familiar with the report that was produced. It wasn't our agency's report, but they did reach out to our consumer assistance program. They did reach out to our office to ask about consumer protection laws and the scope and breadth of those laws as they apply to Vermonters. So
Senator Perchuk has a pointed question, I think. Go ahead, Senator.
Yeah, I think instead of having you go into all the things in the study, because a lot of those aren't really pertinent because there is no proposed law or change for a lot of those things about, unless you, in your looking at it, think that there's a need for more consumer protection, then we'd want to hear that. But specifically, my question is there a consumer protection issue for allowing direct-to-consumer manufacturer to open a service center and then once they open that service center, become a dealer in the state and follow all the dealer laws? Or is there any loophole that would not protect consumers in that situation? That's proposed like an S47 if you've looked at that.
yeah, the short answer to your question, Senator, is that the Consumer Protection Act would certainly apply in all of those circumstances. I think what the report alluded to was currently direct-to-consumer can raise some problematic notions for the individual consumer who attempts to either enforce a provision of a contract if there's a contract dispute, things like that, because those contracts may provide for questions or conflicts among jurisdictions. However, the state of Vermont does not cede our jurisdictional authority if an entity has a sufficient nexus to the state and its consumers, i.e. they are doing business here and selling vehicles to Vermonters. Absolutely, the Consumer Protection Act applies and we would enforce it for violations. This does come up in the context of other actors that have strictly online services, some of which Vermonters may not even be aware of. As you all likely remember, there was a significant and very interesting debate about data brokers. These are third-party entities that buy and sell information about Vermonters, often without the Vermonter ever even knowing it. The state did take action to have those entities register in the state, but there was little or no question that in the event of a data breach, for example, with a private company like that, the state does have enforcement authority to protect Vermonters and their information. So with respect to whether or if the state should be setting market conditions or certain criteria for a manufacturer to come into the state and operate a service center, that doesn't fall squarely within the traditional notion of what we think of when we think of consumer protection in terms of some kind of unfair, patently unfair or deceptive act. It's more a question of consumer convenience. And then if the state were to make that kind of policy determination, what would be the criteria in which a manufacturer would have to act? Those are some of the questions you've just raised vis-a-vis, would they have a third party nexus? Would they operate their own? Those kinds of things. Those are policy determinations that fall outside the Consumer Protection Act for purposes of unfair or deceptive activities. But I think that's ultimately the question that your committee is grappling with.
Because on the bill last year, which where the language where it ended up is basically what S47 is, there were some that said, oh, this is going to put Vermont consumers at some kind of jeopardy because all the laws of consumer protection that the dealers have to follow, somehow this would change that. But that's why we specifically are just changing it so that if they came in, they would be dealers, and then they'd have to follow all those same consumer protection laws. So I just wanted to confirm that the AG's office didn't see any consumer protection issues with S47, even though today we were talking about the study more than the bill.
Yeah, I think
looked at S47.
Yeah, without commenting specifically on the bill, because I'd want to review that. That wasn't one that I think came to our office for review specifically. But I can say, like, the stronger the nexus to the state and the stronger the regulatory framework for any entity, then the greater likelihood it is that the other consumer protection laws apply. So that's just another way of saying, for example, with data brokers, we never ceded our authority to enforce under the Consumer Protection Act. However, now that those entities actually all annually register with the state, they basically proclaim, yes, we are doing businesses in the state. Yes, we collect Vermonters' information. Here's how we do it. And they make certain disclosures. That really sort of lessens the notion that, you know, there's a question about the jurisdiction of the state. So I think the more activity there is within the state, the more those consumer protection laws apply. It's a natural consequence of doing business in the state and operating lawfully within our boundaries.
Okay, and then maybe when we take up S47 specifically, we would ask the AG, maybe it would be somebody else, not the Consumer Affairs Division, about if there's any other legal issues of one prohibiting a manufacturer, like do we run into Commerce Clause issues or anything like that by prohibiting somebody from opening a service center in the state? And then are there any other legal issues that we should know about? But we can talk about that when we take up S47 more efficiently.
It's a really interesting question, Senator, and I do want to note I am cognizant of there's a Massachusetts case on point from 2014 that got into this question about an operator wanting to come in and in that case, I think operate essentially a dealership or a showroom, a little different than a service center or warranty center. But nonetheless, that was an interesting case because the statute itself was not in question. It was not a challenge to the statute itself. The question was, and what the court looked at in that instance was, the protections that were set out in statute really were meant to guard against abuse or unfair practices that the manufacturers might foist onto the franchises themselves. And so it was all a framework set out to ensure fairness between the franchisee and the franchisor. What the court noted in that opinion, and the reason that in that case Tesla was permitted to operate was because they had in fact applied for and been granted a license to operate. And because the court found this whole framework deals with the franchises and franchisors, not with third parties who just want to compete in the marketplace. So that's a little different. And the statute that you're talking about is a little different because it does appear to be sort of currently a straight up prohibition on certain activity. But I do note that when you look at, and I'll direct the committee to 9 VSA 4084, which is the findings section of one of the provisions that sets out the sort of nature of the conditions between franchises and manufacturers or franchisors. The findings are really in some ways consistent with that Massachusetts case because it talks a lot about the unequal bargaining power of the franchise versus the manufacturer. So I think in some ways the laws harken back to a different time. And now that commerce is increasingly moving online and people are able to, in fact, make purchases online with some of these newer car dealers, it's an interesting question, and I appreciate that you're grappling with it. Ultimately, I think it's a policy determination for the state of Vermont. We have not taken a position on that as a policy matter, but it's an interesting one. And you're basically, I think, talking about convenience and access for consumers, a little different than unfair or deceptive practices, which is what we typically deal with in consumer protection. But so I did want to point that out. I took a moment to just kind of dig into those issues a little bit. And the Massachusetts case was not, again, just want to be clear, I don't think our statute is subject to challenge. We are tasked with defending the laws of the state of Vermont. We would do that because that's the statute is written. But the question is, do you want to amend that or change it in some fashion? And that's for your committee and for your the rest of your body to consider.
Okay, well, we've got a lot to digest here, and well, thank you for joining us this morning, and we'll continue our discussion. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. If any one of you would like to follow up or has questions and wants to contact me individually, feel free to do so.
All right, good. Thank you very much again. Okay, let's see. Next this morning, we have the truck permit issue, and I think that goes to, must be Brattleboro. I mean, yeah, Brattleboro. Mike Smith is here this morning and Joe Segali.
Yes, we are, and we're happy to be here.
Okay. All right. I guess this goes back to the issue of trucks going through Woodstock. Is that it?
That's one of three issues, but the commissioner will kick us off.
Okay. All right.
Good morning.
Who wants to lead off? Oh, Wanda. Okay. Oh, the boss is with us. All right. Okay.
Yes.
We have to
So
be
good morning.
we have to be careful now. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
No trick questions. So good morning. Wanda Manoli, Commissioner of Vermont Department of Motor Vehicle, for the record. We are here this morning to talk about Section 26 that was in the DMV miscellaneous bill last year, which is online permitting system and a report to study specific safety and financial implications. So first of all, I would just like to say to the committee, we have Joe Segali, the Director of Policy and Research with us. We have Kevin Marcia, who is the Director of Asset Management at the Agency of Transportation. Mike Smith, the Director of Operations, DMV. And we also have Derek Femby, who is our Chief of the Commercial Vehicle Unit, who oversees and processes. His team works on all of the permits. Very briefly, I'd like to say to the committee, the first part of Section 26 requires and authorizes the Commissioner of Motor Vehicle to develop an online permitting system. And I want to give you a really brief update on this. The RFP for this system that would create an online opportunity 24 hours a day for businesses has gone out. We are currently in the final phases of the procurement process. We have not awarded. We are still in discussion, so I cannot get into the details on that contract at this point. Our goal is to have this finalized in the next 2 weeks. And our plan, if everything goes well, by midsummer to the end of the summer, we will have the online permitting system available to Vermont businesses. This system will have the capacity to allow municipalities to come in and use the system. There will still need to be some work with municipalities on this, but we're confident this can occur and look forward to making that happen. So that's the update on that. And I will just move to Director Segali actually has filed the legislative report. It's very detailed, it's very lengthy regarding the study. So he has put together a PowerPoint that will walk you through the 4 specific items that you wanted us to report on and discuss. And I think it should be fairly quick because it is lengthy and there's a lot of detail in it. And then we could open it up for questions if that's okay.
Before we do that, may I ask a question?
Yep.
This system that we're in the process of procuring, I assume that it's a system that's being utilized in other states and has a track record of successful functionality.
The vendors that responded to the RFP do, yes.
Okay. And how much do you estimate this software is going to cost? You allowed us to spend up to $250,000. We are still in that price range. So. Okay. All right,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good morning, Joe Segale, Director of Policy Planning and Research. Liz, oh, great, I gotta share my screen. She's ahead of me. Okay, can you all see that?
Yep.
All right. So there are actually 3 questions in this study that are addressed. One has to do with Class 2 town highways and whether trucks that are up to 80,000 pounds can travel on Class 2 town highways without a permit, and what are the implications of that? And that's a permit from the municipalities. And I'm going to take each one of these separately, and then I think I should stop after each question so that you guys can talk about it, because they're all different. And if we move on through all of them at once, I think, it might be harder to do that.
Good idea. Good idea. Yep.
The second question has to do with overweight permits for wreckers. When wreckers go out and have to tow a large vehicle, a tractor trailer, when you combine those 2 vehicles together, they are often in excess of oversized and overweight permits. And the question is whether we should provide a blanket permit for them just to let them haul it to their repair destination. And then the third question is the US 4 overlength permit through Woodstock and whether that should be repealed. So starting with Class 2 town highways, just to make sure you all are familiar with these. So the definition in statute is that they're the most important local roads. They often connect 2 or more municipalities, generally have more traffic than Class 3 roads, which are the back roads or residential streets. There's about 2,800 miles of Class 2 town highways in Vermont. It's about 20% of all the town highways. So they, by statute, have a weight limit of 24,000 pounds. And the question is, should we up that to 80,000 pounds? At least that's how I interpret the question. And then their general characteristics, most are 2 lanes. There's some exceptions to that, like in Chittenden County, Kennedy Drive, for example, I think is a Class 2 town highway, and that's 4 lanes. Most of them are paved. Speeds generally 25 to 45 miles an hour. And this is the important part, and probably why the weight limit is only 24,000 pounds is, these are old farm to market roads that have been paved over the years. They don't have an engineered base. They don't have engineered pavement. They also go through rural areas like what's shown up in the top picture, and they also go through the small villages and town centers along the way. So to look at the impacts on infrastructure, it's like, what would it cost to upgrade all Class 2 town highways to 80,000 pound standard? So remember, this is 2,800 miles and quite a few bridges and culverts. And so it's a big number. It's almost, it's $3.15 billion if we were to upgrade all those roads. And that's based on a cost of about $1 million a mile to reconstruct. And if we were to do that, it's not really it's the towns. If the towns were to do that over 30 years, it's about $105 million a year. And, 8.5 Fed and 67.1 million state share, because we do provide match for local roads, and then 29.3 million of local costs.
That's not going to happen.
And I just kind of, ran that out. What's the impact on the gas tax? It's, you can see those numbers there. It's a significant impact on the gas tax. And it's a good question. It's like, if we were going to spend $3.15 billion over the next 30 years, is this where we would put the money? And then I also looked at the impact on the municipal tax rate. So on average, it's about 6 cents per $100. And it really varies depending on how many miles of Class 2 town highway it has. And of course, it's grand list, right? And you can see there's some towns where it's 20 to 50% increase. And, that would never happen either. I know in my town, usually anything more than 3% gets tons and tons of resistance. So anyway, that's what we were asked to do is like, what's the financial impact of doing that? And then the other question,
you're muted, Jane.
Joe, I have 80,000 pounds. Gosh, I'm trying to recollect. For example, fuel delivery trucks, they exceed the 24,000. Didn't we have some testimony last year that some of the just routine truck traffic would exceed the limit? And just for things that people take for granted. Can
Right.
someone clarify? I don't profess to be an expert on vehicle weight. Am I remembering that correctly? Or what are we talking about when we talk about 80,000 pounds?
80,000 pounds would generally be the larger tractor trailers.
Okay.
And, a smaller fuel vehicle truck is probably, around the 24,000 pound limit. I don't know, Kevin, if you have any specifics on that or not, but that's something we could, it's a good point. We understand that's the challenge is these trucks are out there probably traveling on the roads anyway.
Yeah, log trucks, for example, I'm sure are on these roads.
Or milk trucks or grain
Yeah.
trucks or
Yeah.
any of type of service truck like that.
Yeah.
And they if they're more than 24,000 pounds, at least by statute, by law, they need to get a permit from the municipality, and they can get a permit for the year, and it's $10 for their fleet, or they can get single trip permits for $5. And it's a good segue into this slide, which is the jurisdictional issues. And there's lots of variations on how the towns administer this. Some towns don't really do it all. They just don't have the staff to do it. And $5 to $10 permit fee really doesn't cover the cost of what it takes them to administer it. And again, sometimes there's just a lack of staff.
Senator Mazza?
Yes, Senator, go ahead.
Joe, to go back on the other issue of the estimated cost, when I read the study, one thing I questioned about that was it assumed that all the roads would have to be increased to 80,000, but what we heard from the Boston Truck Association was those trucks are already on those roads. So it's not, I didn't see the difference. Why is the fiscal impact as if we'd have to increase all the roads when the trucks are already on those roads? Like, this permit isn't prohibiting the trucks, other than a few towns they said that do put a weight limit on it. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, yes, it does. And part of it is like the challenge is like, how do you approach a study like this? And you kind of can take it to the extreme. And I would say that's an extreme, right? Is to rebuild all the roads. But the way I was reading this is that if we're going to allow trucks to travel on Class 2 town highways without, at the same weight that they're allowed on the state highway systems, up to 80,000 pounds, that certainly means at some point, as you reconstruct the roads, you're going to need to meet that standard. It doesn't necessarily mean you need to go out there right now and make the changes. But if that's the standard, then you need to build to that standard.
But aren't we allowing them now? They're like, that's not really the question, if we allow them or not, because they're allowed, they just need to get the $5 permit.
Right, but the purpose of the permit is for the municipalities to be able to guide those trucks along the roads where there's the least amount of potential damage and the least amount of potential risk. So it's a way to manage it.
But that's a lot cheaper alternative than bringing all those Class 2 roads up to that standard.
Right. And, you can argue with that number, cut it in half if you want, or stretch it over 100 years to rebuild all the roads. But it's just that if that number is put in statute, Class 2 town highways need to be need to have an.
I don't want to have those phone calls.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's why I thought it was kind of a false presentation of the cost, because it's not really. It's like, if we change the law, we'd have to do this, but the trucks are already on the road. And I understand for the towns, I support the towns having some control, but what we heard from the truckers is like almost all the towns don't exercise that control. So that's maybe different than the report that you're reporting on.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the question that I have on this issue.
I think
also, Andy, I know you were in Marshfield. There are also segments of these class roads that are highly used, and from Cabot, Vermont, Cabot Creamery down to Route 2 in Marshfield has a tremendous amount of traffic. So your example in no way controls for sort of the volume of the heavier weight traffic, but that road certainly is one where it was a real problem in terms of the condition of the road. And Marshfield would have had most of the burden for a business that was located in another town, and they weren't able to do it. So AOT helped out on that. But the other factor here is his great variability in terms of the extent to which some of these roads are handling a high volume of these higher weight trucks.
And to add to Senator Perchulik's comments, as a former town select person, we didn't even understand why we were collecting the $10, to be honest with you. We didn't know what our, and we were a very proactive board, but we had no idea why we were collecting and what our powers were.
Yeah,
Senator-
and
I'm sorry, Joe, may I just add on to what Senator Ingalls just said? So that's my core concern with these $10 permits is I just don't see them, from what the testimony I've seen so far, as accomplishing the goal of managing the use of our roadways. And I wonder if we should be looking at more available technologies and capabilities of monitoring traffic through license plate recognition, which is technologies that's used in different ways, or enabling municipalities to steer through intelligent mapping with Google mapping services and the other services that our GPS systems use. If that might be a more intelligent way to truly track, manage, and steer the usage of these municipal town roads rather than these hindrances or these obstacles of $10 nuisance fee registration fees that seem to just inhibit free trade and flow of goods and services.
And Senator Chittenden, also more education for the select boards or the municipalities who are there to educate them to what their responsibilities and powers are.
yeah, I think it does all boil down to that, because obviously we're not going to make, you can argue with whether or not that investment has made it or not, but there would be some impact on the roads for sure if you just let, heavier trucks go wherever they kind of need to go or wherever they want to go. And it seems this is more about how to make the permitting system work more efficiently. And as Commissioner Manoli said, there is the option to include municipalities into our online e-permitting system, which could make it more efficient because at least there's kind of one-stop shopping for the truckers. And yeah, it'll take time and the truckers will have to learn about it and the municipalities will have to learn about it. But I also know, just reading through the survey that Vermont League of Cities and Towns did, that the municipalities are concerned about having some control and making sure they have the option to guide trucks away from other sensitive areas like neighborhoods or places where there's more foot, bike, and horse traffic or whatever, and they don't want to totally give up the control of their roads. And so it's how do we make that system work more efficiently? I agree. And I don't know what the next step is on that, but I think that's kind of how we left it in the study.
If I could just add one follow-up, and I see Chair Mazza is not on right now, so I guess I'll just take the liberty of talking. I'm seeing increasingly smart cars, and I'd love to see smarter roads, and that's where I'm going to keep coming back to how can we use the available technologies employed elsewhere to enable municipalities in the state to better manage the use of our roadways. But I'll stop.
So should I move on to the next issue?
This is Commissioner Manoli. I think if the committee's ready to move on to the next issue, I think it would be great, and just being sensitive to time. But back to this one issue, not only were we asked to evaluate the cost impact, the financial impacts, it's also to identify the safety. And just really briefly, what Joe is presenting is the difference between the engineering design of a state highway versus a local road. And statute is at 24,000 pounds, and our state highways are designed at 80,000 pounds. And so the impact of just making this broad and across and increasing it to 80,000, our concern is not knowing what the local what the municipalities' limitations are on those roads. And I think that's part of where where we've in this report found that the towns want to maintain control over that because their highway divisions or their town divisions do manage that information. And I don't, so I think we can move on to the next one, but it's just important to understand the balance of looking at safety and financial on this particular study.
Okay, thank you. So the next issue has to do with oversized, overweight permits for wreckers towing a disabled vehicle. And with that photo, you can see the situation, which is this is a large wrecker, coming to pick up a tractor trailer. And the total length is going to exceed our length limit, which is 75 feet. The combined weight of both vehicles, if you consider them one vehicle, would exceed the weight limits of 80,000 pounds. And so the current requirements is that the wrecker can tow this vehicle to the nearest safe haven only. And once they reach the safe haven, they either have to break the vehicle down, into the tractor and the trailer, or maybe even unload it and then move it and its parts to the final repair destination. And so the question we were asked is, what's the impact of allowing the wreckers to tow the disabled vehicles to its final destination without having to stop and get a special oversized or overweight permit? And then if so, like what sort of conditions might a blanket permit have in it? And so this one is a little bit challenging to evaluate because, we're talking about random trips. They can happen, the crashes or incidents can happen anywhere. The destinations they're taking could happen anywhere. So we're
like
thinking about
Smuggler's Notch.
Yeah. So the risk assessment is, thinking more in general terms in this case. So when it comes to safety, 12 to 30%, there's a 12 to 30% chance of encountering a bridge with some sort of physical restriction. And what that means is it may be, out of alignment a little bit, like, there's the famous wrong way bridge on Route 15, Cambridge. And, there's lots of other bridges like that in Vermont, or they might be kind of narrow. And it doesn't mean that 12% and 30% are all restrictive, but that's enough to sort of want to take a look and to make sure there's not going to be any issues. There could be height limitations as well. We're particularly concerned about work zones. 30% of the work zone crashes involve large trucks. And of course, work zone locations work zone locations happen all over the place, and they change frequently. So, we just like to have the opportunity before oversized or overweight vehicle is moved to make sure that they're not going to encounter any of these areas and there won't be any significant constraints. And, and if there are, there's certain methods that can be put in place to make sure that the movement can happen as safe as possible. When it comes to infrastructure condition, 1% to 5% of our bridges are in poor condition, which is excellent, right? That more than exceeds our performance target, which is generally around 10%. But there's still a chance that doesn't mean that every poor bridge has a structural issue, but that's enough for us to kind of want to take a look to make sure there won't be any issues. You also need to, yes.
Joe, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Liz, the phone call I just got from Senator Mazza, he got dropped off and he's having trouble getting back in.
Oh.
So,
Okay.
Senator Perchlik, you're in charge until our chair can somehow get reconnected.
All right.
Sorry to interrupt, but
That's okay. You want me to keep going though, or should we wait?
No, he wanted to have the committee keep going.
Okay. So we like to make sure that there aren't any obviously posted bridges along the route and other constraints like that. So those are the kind of that's why we allow the vehicle to be moved from the it's the location where it became disabled to the nearest safe spot. But from there, we want to be able to assess the risk and then make a decision on whether they can move the entire tractor trailer to its final destination and whether it needs to be broken down or get a special permit. And I would say, and Derek Fenby, if he's on the line, there are some the officer on the scene has some flexibility in determining if it's only 15 miles to the destination, they may just say it's okay, and they kind of know there's nothing between here and there. We feel safe about it. They have that flexibility. So the potential blanket permit conditions, if we were to provide a blanket permit, just a little bit of information, what the states around us are doing. In New Hampshire, in Mass, they have similar situation that we do in Vermont, which is you have to bring the disabled vehicle to a safe haven, and from there either get a permit or break it down to move it. New York has a blanket permit, but it's not really overreaching. It allows them to move the disabled vehicle up to 10 miles. The combined weight of the wrecker and the disabled vehicle can't be more than 100,000 pounds. And there's other certain weight limits by axle and the record can't be more than 40 feet. And I looked at maybe 6 or 7 other states to see what they have for blanket permits. We didn't do a 52 state, inventory, but I was just looking for examples. And as far as some of them have limitations on how far you can tow, 10 to 100 miles. 10 was in New York State. Given Vermont's size, 75 miles might be reasonable if you were going to, wanted to make sure they had all the flexibility to get to any repair destination. And the weight limits were all over the place, including no limit up to 160,000 pounds at different axle loads as well. The tow vehicle needs to weigh more than the vehicle it's towing, and it can't be more than 40 feet. The individual weights of the tow truck and the disabled vehicle by themselves can't exceed the statutory weight limits, including a permit. In the permit of list of restricted bridges every year, so they know where to avoid. And maybe the permit would only allow overweight vehicles, not oversized vehicles, because oversized vehicles are where most of the concern is when it comes to safety. So that's this issue. The question is, should we carry on the way that we're carrying on, or should the statute be amended to allow for a blanket permit to be issued with some constraints, with some parameters on it? This one is a little complicated.
And at this time, I would just say to the committee, because they can move to a safe place, and we are in, we align with New Hampshire and Mass, we would not recommend for safety reasons to make changes to the current requirement regarding the transportation of the industry trucks off the highway with towing. And that would be, go ahead.
What was the genesis of this? Did this come from the industry? Andy, can you remember, or somebody, I'm trying to remember where this issue got raised and by what entity? Because it does seem like our neighboring states, which are always a concern, we're aligned with them. I don't know if there's a definition of safe haven or whether that's a matter of judgment, but where did this, can somebody refresh my memory? Where did this issue get raised?
So if I can, Senator Kitchell, Mike Smith is on this call with us, and he did sit in on the testimony, and he may recall from where in the industry this came.
Yeah, okay.
Mike Smith's on all of our calls.
I'm a popular person, and I have a shorter doppelganger too. But and I'm sorry to admit, but I do not recall where this issue came from. So I'm not going to be.
Was this something the House added?
Maybe. But I thought the Bus and Truck Association did bring it up, because I don't think there's a tow truck association.
Yes, there is, and there was language I saw when I was working on the study, and I think it might have actually been in the original bill that you were working on, and it was the Vermont Towers or Towing Association had proposed it, where they basically were it would have allowed for a blanket permit with some similar conditions, a max limit of maybe 50 miles, and some of these other weight limits were provided. So I assume that led to this study.
Okay. And I remember, now that you say I do, because I remember we heard from that association on the issue of the pull-over law, whether it applied to wreckers on the highway, or there was a question on the floor about that, at least in the T-bill last.
Yeah.
Okay, well, is that it from AOT?
That's on this issue. There's one more to go.
Okay.
So in summary, what you're saying is you've looked at it, it's complicated, it's all over the map, and you would recommend that we maintain where we are so that we're aligned with our two neighboring states.
Yes. And that it's also because we feel like it's the safest way to go.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to move on to the question about repealing the US 4 special overlength permit. And so this permit, applies to Route 4 right here, which is from the New Hampshire border to Vermont 100 and 100 South in Bridgewater. And it goes through the towns of Hartford, Heartland, Woodstock, and Bridgewater. It's about 27 miles long. And it applies to trailers that are between 68 and 75 feet long. So everywhere else in Vermont, the maximum length is 75 feet. You can travel on Vermont highways without an overlength permit up to 75 feet. The permit, the special permit on Route 4 was established in 2000, and it was done in conjunction with the Vermont Truck Network, and that's the map that shows the old Vermont Truck Network that was created in 2000. And back then, that tractor trailers were getting longer and longer, and they got up to a max trailer length of 53 feet, which gets close to 73 feet. And so the way that the truck network worked is you could travel on the truck network without a permit up to 73 feet at that time, except on Route 4, the truck network was eliminated in 2009, I think, and so now trucks can travel up to 75 feet anywhere on Vermont highways except for Route 4. We issue the DMV issues the permit. It's a free permit. We issue about 850 or so permits a year. And Woodstock is the only community along the way that has an ordinance that allows them to issue tickets if they pull over a truck that doesn't have a permit for some reason. And they issue about 125 violations a year. And the permit or the violation is somewhere between $400 and $1,000, depending on first, second, or third violation. So the financial impacts if this was repealed, just to kind of give you a little bit of perspective, there's about 191 tractor trailers that travel on Route 4 on an average day on that section of Route 4. And to put that in perspective, on average on similar Vermont roads, which are all listed there, about 268 tractor trailers a day. And you can see some of the really big ones are, Virgins has 432. They have some issues with downtown Virgins, and Shelburne on Route 7 is 630. So, it's in the middle, and it's average. And when the permit went into effect in 2000, the number of tractor trailers decreased by about 40 or so a day on Route 4, which means that those tractor trailers are taking other routes, right, between their origin and destination. The shortest path is definitely along Route 4, but they're increasing their truck trip lengths we calculated by an average of 5.4 miles. So that means they're generating more truck miles of travel. You probably heard of vehicle miles of travel, but specific to truck miles of travel every year of about 81,000 miles. And that's all on other, state roads and some local roads, maybe some class 2 roads, if you're taking some shortcuts. So we can put some, dollar values on that. It's not huge dollar values, but it's about 39 cents a mile on the cost, the impact on pavements and bridges. And so depending on whether or not, they buy all their diesel fuel in Vermont or not, it's between $27,000 and $32,000 a year impact probably on the state budget. And then there's another $10,200 a year of external costs, things like noise, air pollution, greenhouse gases, general safety. And granted, those costs are spread out over multiple users and agencies, but that's the final financial impact. If the permit was repealed, that's money that's saved. So it doesn't necessarily cost more money to repeal the permit. So in terms of safety, that's obviously the primary concern. We looked at the crashes involving tractor trailers that have happened along Route 4 in a 10-year period. So there were about 30 crashes a year. There was there was one fatality in that time frame in 2013. And what happened is there was a car traveling eastbound, it's coming around a curve, and it went over the center line and it hit a tractor trailer head on, and there was a fatality resulting. Since then, we've installed centerline rumble stripes along Route 4 from Woodstock to the interstate, and we've made some other improvements like radar feedback signs and Queechee for around crosswalks and just a few other radar feedback signs. And the speed limit on most of this section of Route 4 is 45 miles an hour, whereas other similar routes, it tends to be, you know, around 50 miles an hour. So to put this in perspective, you looked at the number of crashes per million miles of truck travel. So along that section of Route 4, it's 1.59, that's the rate. And national tractor trailer crash rates are closer to 3. So in terms of total crashes, it's definitely, you know, not as frequent along that corridor. Similar with property damage or injuries, it's significantly less. You know, with the fatality, since there was one, it's relatively low traffic volumes. It's a bit higher. But I think it's important to just look at the village of Woodstock itself, because 10 of the 30 crashes happened in Woodstock. And there were no injuries or fatalities, you know, probably because the speeds are slower, 25 miles an hour. And with the one exception of this intersection shown here, this is Route 4, there was no other pattern that kind of emerged. I mean, crashes, you know, once you get into a built up area, crashes are going to happen because there's just more opportunities. So this is called the intersection of Heartland Hill. This is Heartland Hill. And when trucks are heading westbound, they, in order to make the corner, they have to swing kind of wide and they cross the center line. And the 3 crashes that have happened is when they didn't swing wide. And you can see right here, this is a sign to the Maple Field, which is right here. And it got wiped out 2 times. You think after the first time they wouldn't put it back in the same spot, or even the second time. But that's what's happening is they're cutting the
not
corner.
the right of way?
You know, here's the sidewalk, right? You would think that that's probably in the right of way. Yeah.
Is it me, Harry?
No, you do not. You're a bad
I'm
girl.
sorry,
You're unmuted, Liz.
I didn't hear the question.
It wasn't a question. It was just Liz was
Okay.
on mute with his background.
Okay. So, you know, this is the one spot where there's a pattern. The rest of the village, there isn't a pattern. And again, there was no fatalities or injuries. This is a Class 1 town highway, so it's under the jurisdiction of Woodstock. And, you know, just eyeballing it from here, it looks like there's room to fix this intersection and provide a little bit more of a turning radii for those trucks to make it. But this is, you know, the concern of Woodstock. So that's it. So that's the question is should this be repealed or not repealed? The agency doesn't have a position on it. You know, I think here's the data for you to think about. Probably could save a little bit of money if you allow trucks back on Route 4. And that didn't include the money that might be saved by, you know, the trucking industry. There's nothing, none of the data suggests that this is any, you know, from a safety perspective, that there's any significant concerns, especially compared to other corridors.
Okay, Senator Chittenden.
So, Joe, I think I just heard you say this could be fixed, this should be fixed, and if it was fixed, this might not be as much of an issue. So how do we fix it? No, is that not what I heard? Senator Kitchens.
I'm not sure Joe's assessment of what the issue is totally safety. I think it is just the character of a beautiful Vermont village and trying to minimize the volume of truck traffic, particularly large trucks through that goes right through the village of Woodstock.
And Joe, my question was, and maybe you had it in your slides and I didn't catch it, in that, do you have evidence that, and if so, how much that the permit is reducing the amount of trucks? I know we heard from people, because there's signs that say, warning, you know, you're going to get fined if you go through. So some people do the runaround, but how do we know how many people avoid Woodstock? And how many people
I just looked at the truck traffic before the permit went into effect and the truck traffic afterwards, and it decreased by 40 trips. And, you know, out of, you know, 190, well, out of about 230, it decreased by 40 trips.
But I would think over time, more and more know about the permit, just get the permit, because it's only, what, a $10 permit or whatever it is, so.
Right.
Yeah, Roland came in on it, and he said particularly companies from out of state wouldn't have a clue that many of the trucker manuals don't even identify this one segment, and then you get to the sign and you can't turn around. That, I think that was one of the pieces. So some of it has to do with the complexity of or this special unique requirement to this one segment of Vermont roads and what it means to our to that sector of business that are sometimes getting hit with very large fines because they don't know that it's restricted and permits are needed.
Right.
Well, I think it's a reasonable question to ask, like, what is the purpose of this permit? Is it to prevent these trucks from traveling on Route 4? Well, not really, right? Because it doesn't do that. It reduces it a little bit, but is it?
It's a deterrent.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a deterrent, but there's nothing about the permit itself that necessarily makes the truck operations any safer either. You know, it's just sort of a strategy to try to reduce some of the truck trips.
Mike, are you raising your hand or waving at people?
No, sorry, I'm raising my hand. I just wanted to point out that these permits have no cost. They're free permits.
Oh,
So,
free.
So just you'd mentioned that they were only $10, but these are absolutely free. And we issue, there's about 829 companies, but that does not represent the trucks that are involved. So they're free permits, so they're issued to many more trucks than the companies.
So we'll go to Senator Chittenden next, but the question, on your cost slide, Joe, did you have the cost to the state, for the issuing these 800 permits every year?
No, I don't have that cost in there.
Because that is a cost that we wouldn't have to do, right?
That would be another cost savings.
Sign each 800 permits.
Yeah, I don't know, Mike, if you have any ballpark and what it takes to issue those permits.
Well, we don't need, but it's something. But Senator Chittenden, you had a question?
I was just going to mention the notion of the free permits, as we took testimony that it's really the hassle, it's the paperwork, it's the keeping track of, the management of. So I don't know if free is the right way to say it, because it just seems like a nuisance. And if anything, maybe we should make it $1,000, but then just give greater flexibility so that it's clear. And then maybe it's for 5 or 10 years and it blankets, they don't have to keep going through it. That's the testimony we heard, is that it's really just a nuisance right now, which carries costs.
Yeah, and I think at the committee, if we wanted to take this up, we'd want to hear from the folks from Woodstock, which we heard from last year, the town manager and the chief of police. And we had a whole series of Woodstock folks come in. And I don't know if we ever heard from, Bethel or the other towns that when trucks don't go through Woodstock, they go through somewhere else. So those communities should probably be asked what they think about it as well. Joe, I guess my last question is, why doesn't the agency have a position? It seems like you list that the savings that we could make, but is it just maybe you can't because it's like a political thing, but.
I think our position is the data kind of speak for themselves.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and Liz said she is working to schedule with the Woodstock folks. So Commissioner Manoli, do you have anything else for us on this issue, or did any of the other senators have any questions on this? I think we're going to hear more from the Woodstock folks. So, Chittenden?
One last one, and I know we're at time, but I'd be curious to know what our structural or infrastructure plans are to address this concern by Woodstock. Nothing we're going to do next year or 2 years, but I think Woodstock might feel better if there's some long-range transportation improvement plan that will somehow get trucks to be able to move through this part of the state without impacting their downtowns negatively, and then they might be more tolerant to revisions to this current permitting policy.
Well, I think that is a potential project at that location. And, you'll hear probably from Kevin and I later on this session on our project selection and prioritization process, and how we're we're providing a path to sort of bring these sorts of projects within our project development process. And so it's like, that's an intersection with a potential issue, and there's probably 100 other potential intersections out there with issues that we have to address. So that's how, that would be our response, is like, that'll provide a method that they can sort of, if they want to move something forward, they could potentially do that.
Okay. Commissioner, any last words?
I just would like to thank the committee and the AOT DMV team that actually worked on this study, because this issue does keep coming up, and it was extremely thorough. It was well thought out, and I think it does start to answer the questions that you really directed us to last year, and we can only build off this. So thank you, and thank you, team.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Good job. I thought it was a great study on all three issues.
Great, thanks.
Okay, well, I guess we're not going to see Mazza again till today, till the floor. So, and then Senator Kitchell left us. So
He's
really
got
letting the
he's got
inmates
phone
in the
issues.
asylum at this point.
Quick, let's pass some things out of committee.
Yeah, we have a quorum. If we only knew what we agreed on, we haven't been around each other in long enough.
Take charge, Senator Perchlik. Take charge.
Well, I think that's it, and I think we're on tomorrow at 9. Yeah, so see you then.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.